According to Kant, every rational being, and when we mean rational being, beings were capable of reasoning, who have the capacity to reason, should be treated as an end in itself and should never be treated, deemed, or even classified as an instrument or a means or a tool for a specific goal or end. And this perspective, according to Kant, should be applied in our daily lives and especially in ethical decision making. And if we will follow this through, we have to consider the fact that rational beings are expected to follow the categorical imperative. And this imperative is unconditional, meaning to say, as a moral command, it should be treated as an end in itself, and that it should not be influenced by any external or psychological inclinations. And for Kant, the categorical imperative itself helps us, inspires us to assume that there is an existence of the rational will, which should also still be considered as an end in itself. Thus, it is expected for a rational being to harness his or her rational principle so that in giving command for a moral action, this movement inspires the human person to treat the rational will as an end in itself as well. And there is this moral obligation within each and every rational being to treat each other not as means but as an end in themselves. And this means that there is an obligation not to treat others as instruments, that I am trying to treat you as something I need because I consider you as something useful. It should not be like that. And therefore, no rational being should ever pass the boundary of using others as simply utilities for goals. And as an example, which has already been given in the PowerPoint, is that it is really immoral to use animals like lab rats for experiments in testing the effectivity of a specific chemical substance. And herein, Kant would suggest that we are within a systematic union. And this systematic union, if we would try to name it, is what we call kingdom of ends. And it is a kingdom of ends because as rational beings, we are morally obliged to be moral agents. And as moral agents, we should treat each other as ends in themselves. And therefore, whenever we act, we should act with due moral respect by acknowledging the fact that each of us deserves to be considered as ends. And if we will really look into this, if we will try to remind ourselves that we are within the kingdom of ends, there will be no marital infidelity, there will be no lying, there will be no murder, treason, or any kind of disloyalty to other people, because in the first place, we treat them as ends and never as means. And when we say that each rational being who is morally obliged to follow the categorical imperative, we are, by this instrument, um, in a course of realizing that each rational being is a sovereign lawgiver in himself. That is, in the kingdom of ends, a rational being is considered as king in his own kingdom. However, it should be clarified that the law being implemented in the kingdom of ends is not dependent on biases or psychological considerations and external proclivities. Rather, the human person as a rational being is not like those that are typically considered as kings in monarchies. Rather, there is an unconditionality of the categorical imperative, which, as the sovereign lawgiver, considers as the moral law. Now, in this participation of the kingdom of end, in the kingdom of ends, theorized by Kant, we should now make the idea that morals are possible and they can only be possible because there is also a moral judgment taking place. And this is because of the sovereignty of every moral agent, wherein the rational agent prescribes the moral law given and within the kingdom of ends. Now, the kingdom of ends includes every moral duty to ourselves and others, meaning to say, we should consider others as, again, ends in themselves. And because of this, there is this underlying condition which states that there is the possibility of morality. And morality is possible because there is this free law giving sovereignty of each human person as a rational being participating as morally obligated in the kingdom of ends. Now, it is very much logical to say that I can never be morally responsible if in the first place I am not free. Because they would say that, why are you telling me that I should be responsible to something that I did not really decide in doing? That is why Kant said, in explaining moral autonomy, that autonomy came from two Greek words, and if you will combine them, it really means self law ruled, wherein the human person as a rational being gives law to themselves or to himself or to herself, and that no external forces or no external sources should ever impede, hinder, or influence the moral law within the human person. Now, how does this work? The rational being or the human person legislates, promulgates, ratifies the moral law within himself or herself. And this proves the autonomy within the human person. Whereas if a human person allows others to impose the moral law for him or for her, this is what we call heteronymous, which means other law rule. And in here, there is no autonomy because, in the first place, according to Kant, what is being followed is a moral law not decided by the rational being himself or herself, but is coming from outside sources. And a clear manifestation of this autonomy is wherein reason exercises autonomy when it governs itself without being interfered by any rational being at all. And this is quite contradictory when we say that I am just being controlled by the current situation that I am into. Remember in our discussion and when you ask us to watch the video from Ateneo, it says there that you should do the right thing not because of any condition at all. Rather, you're doing the right thing because it is the right thing. And this presents the unconditionality of the moral law in the face of the categorical imperative suggested by Kant. Now, a rational being is morally free because of moral autonomy. And this moral autonomy, therefore, is that he or she, as a rational being, accepts the universal moral law as the categorical imperative. Now, to act autonomously gives the required freedom from all external or other law-ruled ideas or laws to be followed. And this is more and here morality is logically possible, and this creates therefore the transcendental ground of all morality. Example, if I would say that I am doing this right now because I would want to have high grades, or I am doing things that I am happy, that's why I do those things, it's quite illogical to say that it is my autonomy, that I have moral autonomy, because in the first place, there are conditions that are being followed, and these conditions prove that my moral law, which I am legislating in my kingdom of ends, is not free from external forces, and therefore my morality is morality of heteronomy. And Kant strongly states that the will of reason as autonomy remains essentially determinate. And we have to really consider the fact that what matters the most, according to Kant, is the morally good will, which is repeatedly stated by Kant as the only thing that is unqualifiedly good, meaning to say, it is not based on any condition or any inclination of anything at all. Rather, it is based on the categorical imperative and following the universal moral law, regardless of any inclination. That is why the ethics or the ontology of Kant is never consequential, because it does not consider whatever will happen. Rather, what it tries to follow is the command of the categorical imperative. Now, for someone to be morally responsible, it should be proven that the rational being is free. And the will is free, according to Kant, if and only if it acts on itself, it acts independently. And therefore, to act independently is to be free from external impediment. Thus, if the will is free, so the agent is morally responsible because he or she acts on its own, and he should be or she should be responsible with what he or she is doing or what he or she has done in the past. And freedom in the sense of autonomy is due to the possibility of morality. Morality is possible because human persons are morally responsible, and there is moral responsibility because man is free in the first place. And one of the exercise or manifestation of freedom is when the human person chooses to obey the command of the categorical imperative. Now, it is clear also that the manner of Kant is transcendental, and the possibility of morality, as what I said a while ago, is presupposed by the freedom of the rational will or the rational principle. And this provides the idea that as moral responsible agents, they are moral agents, first of all, which are free. Now, the different perspective regarding the rational will as the sovereign autonomy of what he or she is doing compared to the heteronymous determination of the physical nature of action based on psychological inclination or proclivities is that Kant wanted to make this necessary, that the dialectical reconciliation of free will and determinism, grounding in the metaphysics of morals. Now, if the ethics of Kant is non-consequential and that the consequences or the repercussions of actions are not to be considered, what we need to do now is to try to say what is required of a goodwill. And as to what we have said a while ago, goodwill is something that is unqualifiedly good. Therefore, the autonomy of the rational agent to accept the categorical imperative as the universal moral law is the basis of saying and showing that the mere fact that the human person considers and obeys and acts from the moral law is a manifestation of acting dutifully and not just my mere desire or proclivity. It is very clear to say now that in spite of the fact that the ethics of Kant is unconditional, meaning to say that it is not based on any feeling, emotion, or end or solution to a problem, the idea of Kant is that the moral law is followed by a morally good will within a rational agent who is free. And in being free, he or she decides to obey the call of the categorical imperative. It is very clear, and it's quite logical to say, that if anyone follows the law of the categorical imperative, and if it should be applied to all rational agents, that rational agents, human persons, are never means, but rather ends in themselves, no one should ever feel disrespected. Instead, each human person would always feel that he or she belongs to a community within the kingdom of ends, where each human person is considered as an end, and that consideration springs from a morally good will, which is an autonomous act of the human person as a consequence of his or her freedom to obey the call of the universal moral law springing from the categorical imperative of Kant's deontology. Indeed, we do the right thing because it is the right thing. Thank you, Doc, and salamat po.